General Counsel for the VT-BEAD.
Thank you. And again, today's workshop is a follow-up to last week's workshop, which you can find a recording of and the slides for that workshop on our website. Today, we're going to discuss the full proposal review, scoring, and negotiation process. So you may recall that we have a pre-proposal process for the BEAD program. And so we're talking about the full proposal process, which is the second part of the application process. And you can find the review, scoring, and negotiation document online on our website at publicservice.vermont.gov/VCBB. On that website, you'll find a link to the BEAD program and all of the relevant BEAD documents there. We do recommend keep maybe referring to that document during the meeting because there are many acronyms and definitions that we'll try to define as we go, but you can find those on pages 2 through 5. Again, today's workshop goals are really to understand how the Vermont Community Broadband Board, or VCBB, will select which full proposals to score. So not all full proposals will necessarily receive a score. Understand how the team will evaluate whether full proposals meet necessary gating criteria. Those are pass-fail criteria that are required for an application to move on to scoring, and then understand how VCBB will score full proposals that have been selected for scoring. Again, here are some of the abbreviations and acronyms we'll refer to today. You can find those in both the RFA and the scoring document. Some of the things that you'll hear will be BSL, also known as location or broadband location. That's a broadband serviceable location. The request for applications, or RFA, that we discussed in last week's workshop. And of course, VT-BEAD, which refers to Vermont's Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. So at this point, I'm going to pass it off to Alexi to talk a little bit about the program timeline.
Thanks, Christina. For those of you who were on the session previously for the RFA, this will look familiar, as well as, again, also posted on our website. We did want to just highlight that, again, as Christina mentioned, we're today talking about full proposal. So there is some time before the full proposal window opens, which is on March 3rd. And there's a 6-week period there before we'll close that. And at that point is when we will begin the processes that Lucy will walk us through today. And with that, Lucy, take it away.
All right, thanks, Alexi. So before I get started, I did just want to note if anyone is searching for the document on the VCBB website, if you want to follow along, as Christina said, it's under the BEAD link on the VCBB website, and specifically under the BEAD link, if you click on BEAD subrecipient selection on that page, it's about the third green block down. So I just wanted to make sure folks know where to find it. So as Alexi said, this workshop deals with the scoring of full proposals. So just a reminder, the full proposals are the prospective subrecipients' bids for providing broadband service that demonstrate compliance with gating criteria and information to inform points awarded for scoring criteria. This workshop does not deal with any of the kind of processing of the pre-proposals, that first period that's coming up. So the reason we're giving information about the kind of review, scoring, and negotiation process of full proposals is that an understanding of where we're headed and kind of where the end places that we're getting to may be helpful to prospective subrecipients in kind of working backwards and thinking about what types of planning you want to be engaging in now to set yourselves up well to understand the full proposal review process. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just a quick review. I think at this point we're well familiar. Gating criteria and scoring criteria. Gating criteria being the pass-fail criteria that you must pass in order to be considered for BEAD funding. Scoring criteria being the criteria that you're awarded points for that differentiate between different proposals that score different numbers of points. And so who will be the members of the review team who will be actually looking over the full proposals? The reviewers or the full proposal review team will be made up of state employees from the VCBB, potentially also state employees from other state agencies, as well as members of VCBB's contracted services support team. And this slide is to emphasize that kind of, despite talking about the gating criteria and the scoring criteria, really a lot of the process of differentiating between different applications, different full proposals really happens during the process of selecting which full proposals get evaluated for gating and scoring criteria. So a large portion of the bulk of this workshop is going to be on how these full proposals are selected to be considered. And that's a really large component of the review process. So I'm going to go through each of these in order in the following slides, but basically when a final project area receives a set of full proposals for that final project area, there's really 3 phases in which those full proposals are evaluated. The first is priority broadband projects, or projects that provide end-to-end fiber to each location in the final project area. And the first priority would be to see if it's possible to select a winning proposal from amongst the set of priority broadband projects that are received. If that's successful, then none of the other full proposals will be looked at. Like that's the first step. If that's not successful, if there's no priority broadband project that's able to be selected that meets all the criteria, then the review team will move on to non-priority projects that provide reliable broadband service. And we'll talk more about that, what that set looks like. But for now, just to see kind of the overall flow, the second goal would be to select a proposal from amongst that set. And if that is not possible, then the review team will move on to considering non-priority projects that do not provide reliable broadband service. And we'll talk more about what that looks like. But so for now, we're going to first focus on kind of that first set of selecting from amongst the priority broadband projects. You can go ahead to the next slide. And so, as I said before, that is projects that provision service via end-to-end fiber optic facilities to each end user premises. And the each is important here because there may be projects that utilize a mix of technology that serve some of the locations with fiber and some of the locations with a different technology. But for priority broadband projects, we're talking about exclusively end-to-end fiber optic projects. So we have a final project area and we're evaluating to see if it's possible to select a priority broadband project for that final project area. This is step 1. So I'm going to kind of walk through these different boxes. So the first question is, did the final project area receive any priority broadband project full proposals? If it did not, obviously we will not be able to select a priority broadband project for that final project area. The second question is, assuming it did, the second question is, do the priority broadband project full proposals meet all necessary gating criteria? So at this point, each of the priority broadband project full proposals for this project area will be evaluated as to whether they meet the necessary gating criteria. And the ones that do will progress to the next step. So let's assume that at least one does. Obviously, if none of them meet the gating criteria, then that would mean opening up to other types of projects. So progressing to the next step, we're going to assume at least one priority broadband project meets the necessary gating criteria. And then the next step is to score the projects, the priority broadband projects for that final project area. It's possible that at this point, there's only one priority broadband project that meets the necessary gating criteria. That one would just become the prospective winner in that case. But if there's more than one priority broadband project for the project area that meet the necessary gating criteria, they get scored. And then the highest scoring priority broadband project becomes the prospective winner. Moving to this kind of orange box, the next step is to compare this prospective winner's proposal to the extremely high cost threshold, which we'll be talking about in greater detail in future slides. But for now, just knowing that there will be an extremely high cost threshold, we will compare to that. And then either the proposal is below the extremely high cost threshold and it proceeds, or if it's above the extremely high cost threshold, we move on to this green box, which is the negotiation phase. So then we negotiate with the prospective winner to see if it's possible to bring their proposal below the extremely high cost threshold. And again, and I'll have a future slide about that. But if at any of these stages, we're kind of proceeding if we're successful. If we're unsuccessful, we're continuing to look for other priority broadband projects that could be successful. And then if we move through the process and we are unable to find a successful priority broadband project, that would be when we would move to the next tier of projects. So just to finish, let's say that we are able to negotiate the prospective winner's proposal below the extremely high cost threshold. Then we move on to this last blue box, which asks, was non-fiber technology introduced as part of the negotiation? So one of the components that could change during a negotiation could be what technology is actually used to reach that some of the addresses or all of the addresses. So in this instance, if the negotiation gets the project below the prospective winner's project below the extremely high cost threshold without introducing new technology, then that would be the winner, because that would be the project that's a priority broadband project that meets all the criteria, that's won at scoring, that meets the gating criteria, and that is below the extremely high cost threshold. If at this point there's other non-fiber technology that's introduced, then that proposal would move with us to the next phase of proposal evaluation, because it now is, it's still perhaps a very strong proposal, but it's no longer a priority broadband proposal, priority broadband project proposal. So it needs to be evaluated against other similar proposals. Next slide, please. Okay, so perhaps we're done. Perhaps we've found a priority broadband project for that final project area, but this is saying, assuming that we have not, then we move on to this next phase, which is other last mile broadband deployment projects that provide a reliable broadband service. So just definitions here, other last mile broadband deployment projects, that means it's not a priority broadband project. So it may or may not include fiber technology, but it is not exclusively fiber technology. And then reliable broadband service is a definition defined in the NOFO, in the BEAD NOFO, which is fiber optic technology, cable, modem/hybrid fiber coax technology, digital subscriber line technology, or terrestrial fixed wireless technology utilizing entirely licensed spectrum or using a hybrid of licensed and unlicensed spectrum. So that is a set definition. That is not a VC-BEAD definition. So this next phase would be projects that use some combination of those technologies. So in evaluating this phase of non-priority projects that provide reliable broadband service, I'll go a little quicker because we're really going to go through the same set of steps with this phase. So first of all, we ask, are there any projects? Are there any full proposals that fall within this category? If there aren't, we move on to the next set of proposals. If there are, we evaluate them for gating criteria. Do the full proposals for this type of technology meet the gating criteria? If none of them do, we move on to part 3, to the next set of proposals. If at least one of them does, we move on to this tan box that says score this type of eligible proposals and select the prospective winner. Of course, if there's only one eligible proposal in that category, it automatically becomes the prospective winner. If there's more than one, we score them, and the highest scoring one becomes the prospective winner. So now we have a prospective winner. We move on to this orange box, compare this prospective winner's proposal to the extremely high cost threshold. This should all feel very familiar because we're walking through the same set of steps with a kind of a different pool of proposals. So then similarly, moving along the same set of steps, this green box here, if the prospective winner's proposal is below the extremely high cost threshold, then it's accepted. If it's above the extremely high cost threshold, we go through the negotiation to try to get it below the extremely high cost threshold. If this whole process does not yield us a successful winning full proposal, then we move on to the next set of full proposals, part 3. And that is other last mile broadband deployment projects that do not provide a reliable broadband service. So breaking down what that means, other last mile broadband deployment projects, meaning it is not a priority broadband project, so it is not exclusively end-to-end fiber, do not provide a reliable broadband service. This is, again, also straight from the NOFO. This is not a VC-BEAD definition. It says technology types that do not constitute reliable broadband service include satellite services using entirely unlicensed spectrum and technologies not specified by the FCC for purposes of the broadband data maps. Of note here is that these proposals, these projects still must provide at least 100 over 20 megabits per second and at most 100 milliseconds latency. So the kind of capability, the speed and network capability requirements still stand. This reliable broadband service definition is just a definition that refers to the type of technology used to meet that speed requirement. So now we're in this kind of last block of full proposals that we've potentially received. You can move forward, Christina. And once again, I'll go more quickly through this because this is now the 3rd time walking through it, but we're then gonna walk through the same process with this step of proposals of, are there any of these proposals? If there are, do they meet the gating criteria? If 2 or more meet the gating criteria, we score them and select a winner. If once we've selected a winner, we compare it to the extremely high cost threshold, and then we negotiate to try to get down below the extremely high cost threshold if it comes up above the extremely high cost threshold. So this is the process we're going through as we're selecting, and I think it kind of shows that there's more to this review process than just going through and evaluating gating and scoring for every single proposal. Moving forward, I think the questions you might have and what I'm going to talk about in the next few slides is how we set the extremely high cost per location threshold, how the negotiations to get below that threshold work, and then also what do we do if we do a good faith effort to go through this entire process and we don't end up with any eligible full proposals. So that's what we'll talk about coming up. Okay, next slide, please. So the extremely high cost per location threshold. There's a few notes about this threshold that I want to make a point of saying. So first of all, this threshold is set after all the full proposals have been received. So this is not a number that exists right now. And that's because the information from the full proposals that VC-BEAD receives are a part of figuring out what the threshold should be. So, you know, how the bids come in helps to understand how much money there is and where the threshold needs to be set. I'll say more on that in a minute. But the second point is that this threshold varies between final project areas. So it's not one threshold for the entire state. It's a threshold that is specific to each and every final project area in the state. The third point I want to make is that this is a threshold that's set iteratively during the full proposal review and negotiation process. This is important for a couple of reasons. So first of all, it means that it means that it's taking into account the fact that negotiations in one project area could affect the amount of money left over for other project areas, and therefore what the extremely high cost per location threshold would be for other project areas. So for example, a really successful negotiation that brings a project, you know, significantly below what was the prior threshold in that area would mean that the threshold for that project area could then be lowered down, which would make additional funding available to kind of increase the threshold in another project area. It also means that no prospective winner of any project area is final until each project area has a winner and a plan in place. So it's possible that that a prospective winner is selected in a final project area, and that proposal is negotiated below the extremely high cost threshold, and is kind of preliminarily selected there as the prospective winner. But as negotiations occur in another project area, it's clear that the extremely high cost threshold has to be adjusted. And so the extremely high cost threshold might change in the first final project area in a way that requires either further negotiation or selection of a different proposal. So that's obviously not that the hope would be that that would not be the case. But I think it's really important to realize that this is an iterative process as selection and negotiation goes on, and that it's not set in stone until every single final project area has a funded solution in place to reach every unserved location, every unserved BEAD location in the area, and as many underserved locations as possible. And then the last thing I want to say about the extremely high cost per location threshold is that the goal is to maximize the deployment of end-to-end fiber while also ensuring that we reach the BEAD requirement of every unserved location in Vermont being served, as well as the goal of as many underserved locations as possible. So that's when setting the extremely high cost per location threshold, those are the parameters that are going to be considered, is how do we make it high enough in each project area to maximize end-to-end fiber wherever possible, while making it low enough that we're ensuring that the BEAD funding will reach every unserved location throughout the state and as many underserved as possible. Christina, you can move ahead. So I just want to talk a minute about that's kind of information about the extremely high cost threshold, and I want to talk a minute about how these negotiations will actually work. There's a lot of different levers that can be pulled. And so the negotiations will really ideally be a collaborative process where the prospective winner and the VC-BEAD are working together to try to problem solve how can we make it work to serve this area within the amount of funding that we have available. So kind of the different factors at play could include, but are not limited to, the amount of BEAD funding that's requested, the amount of matching funds that's required, in limited circumstances, if absolutely necessary, requesting a waiver if there's a certain requirement from the NTIA that is not that is making it not possible to serve the area. That would of course be subject to NTIA approval. So that would be kind of a very narrow option in very limited circumstances. Then adjusting the list of locations included in the final project area, the technology type, as we discussed before. So there, there's the goal is kind of a collaborative process of just understanding what are the limiting factors here and how can we problem solve to make this work. Next slide, Kay. Okay, and then the final piece that I think likely was a question in people's minds as I was going through this process of how are we selecting full proposals to evaluate them and choose a prospective winner is what happens if there's no prospective winner. So either if a project area just might not receive any full proposals, which we're hoping will not be the case, but it's always a possibility, or it doesn't, or the full proposals it receives, none of them pass the gating criteria, or maybe there is one or two that passes the gating criteria and they absolutely, despite everybody's best efforts, cannot be negotiated below the extremely high cost threshold. So what happens in those instances where we don't end up with a winner? Well, we have to serve every unserved address in the state. So there's no option to just proceed without serving a final project area. So the options available as laid out in the BEAD NOFO, are to negotiate a plan with prospective subrecipients that are seeking to serve other areas adjacent to those locations or any other known providers in the area, or known prospective providers in the area. And then similarly to kind of the negotiation process, VCVB will be looking to assess the barriers that prevented any providers from submitting full proposals, and then review any possible modifications to kind of address those barriers and make it possible to serve the area. And throughout this process, the goal will be to seek out the most robust, affordable, and scalable technologies, while also considering any technology type, with the understanding that ultimately we need to come up with a solution in every project area. Okay, I'm gonna just take a breather for a minute, because now we're moving into more of the specifics about how are the gating criteria and how are the scoring criteria evaluated. So I'm just transitioning, pausing, and saying that was all information about the process, and now we're moving into specifics. So gating criteria, these over on the right-hand side of this slide is the list of gating criteria that reviewers will be considering. This first one, the overall project specifications, has to do specifically with some of the components outlined in volume 2 in Vermont's initial proposal, volume 2. So this has to do with, making sure, for example, making sure that you submitted a pre-proposal if you're required to submit a pre-proposal. In the previous workshop, we talked about those scenarios when you would or would not be required to submit a pre-proposal. But then it also has the BEAD program requirements of making sure that the number of served project locations don't exceed 20% of total project locations in your project. And then the joint BEAD VCVB requirement that at the time of the full proposal that you're proposing to serve every unserved and underserved location in the project area. The remainder of the gating criteria, other than overall project specifications, are specifically what's outlined in the BEAD NOFO in terms of gating criteria. So I'm not going to go through every single one by one, but the points I do want to make are twofold. Over on the left-hand side of this slide, first, that the kind of standard that's outlined for evaluating these gating criteria is to consider the totality of information provided throughout the entire full proposal. I see Tony has her hand up. I wasn't sure, Tony, if you were hoping to interject something.
No, I didn't even put my hand up. I don't know how it happened. I'm so sorry.
No worries. No worries. So, yeah. So each gating criteria is evaluated based on the totality of the information. And determined, and then secondly is determined in a pass-fail manner. So for example, just using this first one here, managerial and operational capability as an example, there's kind of two components to this, which is the prospective subrecipients demonstrate that they're in good standing regarding their Federal Communication Commission obligations, reporting, et cetera. And then also the prospective subrecipient demonstrates managerial and operational capability with respect to the proposed project. So it's a really broad, requirement that's going to be met through the combination of answers to multiple questions on the full proposal, on multiple questions on the full proposal form. And ultimately, all of those questions kind of feed into and boil down to one single pass-fail question, which is through the totality of information provided, the resumes of staff, the description of the partnerships, the description of the organizational structure, through the totality of information provided, has this prospective subrecipient shown that convinced the review team that they have the managerial and operational capability to perform on the project that they're proposing. So I won't go through each of these specifically, but I do really, really, really highly suggest and recommend that each of you go to the document that is on our website, the BEAD full proposal review scoring and negotiation guide, and look through kind of the specific components of each of these, because similarly to what I described with managerial and operational capability, there's kind of there's like a pass fail of just overall, do you have the financial capability to perform on the project as outlined? And then there's also some specific considerations that are also a component of the overall valuation, such as, for financial capability, one example of that would be, are you meeting the letter of credit requirements? Did you do your financial assumptions make sense, and are they in line with industry standard metrics? So I definitely recommend spending some time with the specifics of what all kind of rolls up into the overall decision of whether or not you pass each of those gating criteria. And definitely feel free to, you're obviously welcome to ask questions in this workshop, or feel free to email any questions to, Alexi's going to correct me here, vcbb.bead@vermont.gov. Okay, I'm getting a nod. All right, Kay, I think you can go on to the next slide. So now I just want to talk about scoring criteria for those proposals that do make it to the point of scoring. There are 7 scoring criteria. The first 6, the minimal BEAD program outlay, affordability, fair labor standards, community input and engagement, local coordination, and speed to deployment will be evaluated for every full proposal that gets scored. The final one, speed of network and other technical capabilities, is not evaluated for priority broadband projects, since they all use the similar end-to-end fiber technology, but will be evaluated for projects that are not priority broadband projects. Okay, go ahead, Kay. So I am going to briefly talk about each one of the scoring criteria, just because I want to make sure that everyone understands when providing information for the scoring criteria, what ultimately earns you points. So minimal BEAD program outlay, which is 31 points. The metric, the only quantitative metric that is, quantitative metric that is looked at here is total BEAD funding requested for the project. So there may be a higher or lower project cost, there may be higher or lower match within that 25% match requirement, but the metric that's considered here is how much BEAD funding are you requesting to serve this project area. And then there's a consideration that's taken into account for the scalability, redundancy, and resiliency of your network, just to recognize that some networks may offer, better value because of better scalability, redundancy, or resiliency, even if they're perhaps slightly more expensive. So there's a consideration taken into account, but the main metric is total BEAD funding requested. Secondly, affordability for 30 points. I should say this is all out of 100 points. So affordability looks at the cost for 1 gig over 1 gig plans for priority broadband projects, and 100 over 20 megabits per second for non-priority. And affordability really emphasizes both what is the cost of your plans, and how long into the future are you committing to maintain that cost. So for affordability, you receive 3 points in this category for each year that you commit to maintain the same price with an inflation adjuster for your 1 gig symmetrical plans or your 100 over 20 plans, up to a maximum of 10 years or 30 points. So so that you can't, so the maximum you could earn from that first bullet point would be 30 points. And then in the second bullet point, you have 1 point deducted for every $10 that your 1 gig symmetrical plan is above the FCC urban rate. And that would be deducted off of however many points you earned in the first bullet point. Okay, fair labor standards for 14 points. 10 of those 14 points is based on your demonstrated record of and plans to comply with federal labor and employment laws, obviously with an understanding that different prospective subrecipients have different, have been in existence for different amounts of time. So there's different kind of criteria if you're a new entity versus an older entity, but overall that's the 10 points come from there. And then 4 points come from, there's 4 specific elements in the scoring guide that in the rubric that can be found in the scoring guide that have to do with promoting job quality and creation. And you get 1 point each for each of those 4 elements. Okay, here's the final set of scoring criteria. So community input and engagement, the dash is it's 12 points for priority broadband projects and 5 points for other projects. So this is a scoring criteria where you either get all or none of the points. And there's 6 options on this list. If you demonstrate successfully 4 of them, you get all of the points. Otherwise, you do not get any of the points. There is a possibility to substitute different items that aren't on the list with prior VCBB approval. So you would need to confirm that with the VCBB prior to the point of submitting your full proposal. Local coordination operates pretty similarly. It's either 11 points or 5 points, depending on the proposal type. And you must demonstrate 3 items out of a list of 5 for full points. Otherwise, you do not receive points. And there's a possibility of substituting items with prior VCBB approval prior to when you submit your full proposal. Speed to deployment is 2 points. They're pretty straightforward. The BEAD implementation period is 4 years. You receive 1 point for each year earlier than 4 years when you will complete all of your implementation. Speed of network and other technical capabilities. This is the one that, as I said earlier, only applies to non-priority broadband projects. It's 13 points, so up to 10 points for speed, latency, scalability, and other technical capabilities, and 3 points for commitment to upgrade technology as it evolves. Okay, so I would imagine that's what I have to share. I would imagine there are probably some questions. And so I'm happy to, well, I'll see if VCBB has anything they want to add, and then I'm happy to take any questions now, either raised hands or in the chat, or you can follow up with the vcbb.bead@vermont.gov email address. And then there's also office hours on Tuesday. Alexi, do you want to, I don't know if you've sent out the link. Do you have anything to add, and do you want to follow up with information about the office hours?
Sure. I believe we sent out that information, but again, you can find it on the workshops and trainings page of the BEAD subrecipient page. It is at noon on Tuesday. Again, any questions that we get either via the mailbox or those sessions, we will be integrating into the frequently asked questions section of the website. That is our primary means of answering those questions. So I did just want to flag that if you email that address, it's unlikely that we will respond directly, so that we are delivering information transparently and equally across all the groups that are involved. Roger just asked, can you share the link to the presentation? Yes, we will be putting that up shortly along with the video. So keep an eye out on the trainings page. That we'll put it down in our previous workshops, and then we provide the link to the recording and materials. And that's it for me. I don't know, Kay, if you have anything.
Okay, great. Let's open it up then. Feel free to raise your hand to start talking, put something in the chat. Krista, did you unmute?
Hi. Yes, thanks. Sorry, I had to go to my phone for some reason. Teams keeps shutting me out on the computer.